Hello and welcome to Rotted Reviews, and today I am going to be taking a look at the 2020 movie, Carrion. Now, if you were to ask me what I thought this movie was about after having watched it, I'd have to say it's about... I don't know. Honestly, okay, in order to get into this movie, I'm going to have to get into, surprisingly and weirdly, Dirk Gently's holistic detective agency, and bear with me on this one. Now, the BBC aired 2 seasons of a show called Dirk Gently's Holistic Detective Agency based on the books by Douglas Adams. And the way that I describe those to people is it's like perspective art. It's like that kind of art piece you see in museums where it's made up a bunch of dangly junk from the ceiling or just a pile of junk with a spotlight on it, and nothing about it makes any sense whatsoever. It's just a mishmash of weird, odd things that have no rhyme or reason to it until you stand in just the right place. And then the picture comes through. And that's what Dirk Gently's Holistic Detective Agency was like. And I thought it was a delight. I do recommend it for anybody that hasn't seen it. I thought it was an absolutely wonderful show. As far as the odd stuff that was dangling and didn't make a whole lot of sense, it was whimsical and it was fun. And ultimately, when it finally showed what it had to show, it was very satisfying and very wonderful in my opinion. So... how does that relate to Carrion? Well, Carrion is a movie that follows along the same lines. Going through it, I really couldn't tell you what this was about. It was just a weird mishmash of odd things, odd events, and honestly, some of the worst dialogue, without hyperbole, some of the worst dialogue I've ever seen put to screen. But the difference between Carrion and Dirk Gently's Holistic Detective Agency is when the final picture does come into focus, instead of having a wild ride come into clarity with all of your questions answered in a beautiful way, this basically just showed a picture of a drunk man pooping on a sidewalk. It was the mishmash wasn't fun, and the final picture wasn't satisfying. So generally, loosely, what this movie was about was the character of Carrion returning to visit her cousin and try to find a safe spot to lay low for a while. From what, we're not really sure. She's just trying to kind of revisit her past and put things together. And then things go haywire from there. And really, like I said, odd fashion. Her cousin has friends that come over. It gets really, really bizarre. It goes into her backstory with her mother. And then that's inexplicably tied to the present, and it's very, very peculiar. But unfortunately, like I said, it's also not very satisfying when it all finally does come together. Now, this was directed by Michael Zako Hall, this is his first full-length motion picture. It's his directorial debut. But he has worked in Hollywood in some other areas, and I'll get into that in just a little bit. But for right now, what I'd like to do is focus on the dialogue. Now, what do I mean by bad? What do I mean by it's some of the worst dialogue I've ever seen put to screen? Well, that comes down to both how it was written and how it was delivered. And unfortunately, both were terrible, and it combined into this weird amalgam of cinematic awfulness.
Hey, Jonathan. Can I crash in the guest house?
How far from the jet, anyway?
You said you'd like to stay here.
Oh, Carrion, let's give everyone a chance to settle for all this talk.
I'm sorry, how long were you thinking of being here?
You must be Ruth.
Can I ask, the getup you have on, is that just for special occasions, or...
Excuse me?
Ruth, honey, that's rude.
I'm simply asking, making conversation.
It was like somebody took the screenplay, ran it through a Russian translator, then back to English, and just did that a baker's dozen times until it was finally ready, and then nobody corrected it and just started speaking the lines. And speaking the lines, there was this really peculiar cadence that was happening to everything, and I don't know if it was purposeful or not, but it was definitely not very interesting. It honestly made for a very bland, boring tone and pace to the movie, where characters would have long pauses in the middle of their sentence.
I really didn't mean to stress you like that tonight. Carrion, She meant so much to
I
me
get
growing.
it. You have a history. But your brother and I, we haven't agreed to this level of intrusion.
You appearing like this?
I thought you'd be happy.
It was just it really made for a very, very weird tempo for the audience to follow. I mean, the dialogue in a movie really does have a certain level of musical quality to it, a tempo, a pace that we follow along with, and that's where the real dance can happen when you have characters that differentiate from one another in their delivery methods. But this one, it was pretty uniform, and weirdly so in that regard. It I don't know, it really put me off, honestly. And the fact that the written dialogue, as it was, the words themselves, were very peculiar. Just odd vocabulary choices that didn't fit the scene and the mood. Certainly not the mood. Given the context of what was potentially going on within these characters and within this environment, it just felt very out of place. So I think to get into anything else, I'm going to have to get into the categories. As always, 4 different categories, each one worth up to 25 points for a total possible score of 100 points. And as you can see, this movie did not fare terribly well. The plot, there really wasn't a whole lot there for me to even judge. Like I said, it all kind of came together towards the end, and I guess to a certain point sufficiently explained everything. But it was very lackluster, and it was not worth the wait to get there. And certainly not what they put us through during that wait. The intent, I think I only gave it a couple points because there were 1 or 2 kills that was pretty decent that I actually, from a special effects standpoint, actually enjoyed. But that really didn't make up for a whole lot there. It was enough that I didn't want to just completely give it a goose egg of 0. The acting, like I said, I don't know. There was so much dialogue in this one, and it was delivered in such an awkward, peculiar manner that I think that really, really affected the acting score in a major, major way. And as far as the technical goes, this is the point I wanted to get to when I was mentioning the director, Michael Zako Hall, is he has had a fine career in Hollywood as a visual effects artist. He has worked on Cloverfield, Pacific Rim, Prometheus, a bunch of really stellar movies that have very good visual effects. And you can kind of see that in this movie. You can kind of see the influence going on there because there was a lot of it that was beautiful, and that's where the technical score gets much higher. Is this was beautifully shot in a lot of ways. I mean, sometimes not so much, but for the most part, there was a high level of technical aptitude in what was put to screen, but a lot of it was ruined by really peculiar editing choices. For a movie that had such awkward pacing on the dialogue, the editing didn't do it any favors. It continued the tradition of odd pacing and the visual fracturing of the film. It was jarring enough and odd enough that I checked out. But also on a technical aspect, I do want to bring up the sound design. And I think ADR specifically, because a lot of this movie sounds like it was recorded in a booth. It doesn't look like it, but it sounds like it. And the discrepancy between the two was jarring. You would have characters that are talking to each other outdoors in nature, and they all sound uniformly talking into a microphone like this. It doesn't work that way, and it's one of those things that you never really notice until somebody gets it wrong. And in this case, somebody got it wrong, and it was quite obvious, and I had to deduct a lot of technical points for the editing and for the sound design and ADR and so forth. It could have been cleaned up. It could have matched the scene better. I mean, ADR sometimes has to happen. it, stuff happens, but it still should match the scene. It still should not feel like somebody was in a booth. So altogether, a total of 18 out of 100 points. I would not recommend this movie, and that's something that I don't say very often. I'm not actually trying to dissuade anybody from watching it necessarily. If you wanted to see it as an art piece or as a conversation piece, then I would be interested to hear your opinions on it. I would love to hear if somebody disagrees with me on this, if they saw more in it than I did. But beyond that, I really can't say that I definitely can't recommend it. And if you're looking for an interesting thrill ride horror movie to get yourself nice and scared with your loved one on a Friday evening, I would say that this one is worth passing on. So that should about do it. That's my review of 2020's Carrion. I really thank you for joining me here today. I look forward to seeing you on my next review. If you like this video, please click like and subscribe and click that bell. And if you want to support me further, my Patreon and my merchandise storefront links are right below. So take care of yourselves, and remember, next time you want to watch a horror movie, first make sure that it's good and rotted.